Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining today's Masterclass. I'm Amber Pritchard, editor of Reward Strategy, and for those of you who aren't familiar with the brand, we publish content focused on pay and reward in print, online, and normally in person. But obviously, COVID has put a stop to that. Make sure you keep your eye out, for the next issue of Reward Strategy. It will be online by the start of the new tax year and will feature a column from More Pay. Speaking of More Pay, today I'm joined by their employment law consultant, Linda Arrowsmith. Hello, Linda. How are you?
Morning, I'm well, thank you. I hope everyone's well.
Thank you for joining us today, Linda.
Oh, my pleasure.
Today, Linda and I are going to help you streamline your annual leave processes and steer clear of any unnecessary administrative mayhem in 2021, because we've definitely got more than enough of that with the pandemic. We're going to look at managing carried over leave balances, employees going abroad, and the risks of self-isolation, and handling your team's leave balances and ensuring cover. We have designated time for a Q&A at the end of the session, but if you have any relevant questions throughout, we will try and answer these as we go along. To ask a question, simply look for the questions box on the right-hand side of your GoToWebinar panel and simply type and enter. Before we get started, I wanted to highlight the obvious, which is that we are all still working from home. So please bear with us if you hear any doorbells rings or dogs and children possibly joining in on the session. And last but not least, building work, because Linda and I both have that going on. So as long as everyone's ready, got a tea or coffee in hand, we can get started. Linda, I'm going to hand over to you to begin with how to handle carried over leave.
Okay, so most of you may be aware that the government changed the law, and it was a temporary law, and this was to allow the carryover of annual leave into the next holiday year. Now, previously, holiday year should have been taken in the leave year it was planned. So this is a big change for employers. But it's important to note that it's just the 4 weeks European entitlement that can carry over, not the full 5.6 working weeks or more if you have enhanced holidays. The proviso is that the carryover relies on it not being practical because of COVID to take it in the holiday year it was accrued. So it may be that you needed all hands to the pump and they couldn't take it because they had to be in work, or it could be that they were all on furlough and they just didn't take it, it got forgotten about. So people may have built up this pack of holidays from the previous holiday year. Now, the government has said it is okay for people to be on furlough and also be on annual leave. That's important to know, especially because furlough is expected to continue at least for the next couple of months. Can we move on?
Yeah, there you go, Linda.
So what are them rules? So the law has said you don't necessarily have to carry them over. The law does allow for you not to carry over them 4 weeks. Now, to do this, you as an employer must evidence that you have taken steps to remind workers to use the holidays in the current holiday year. Some employees or employers have cancelled pre-booked annual leave and they've not actively encouraged staff to take them. So people have built up this excess amount of annual leave. Now, in these cases, the worker must be allowed to carry the holiday over. So I'll just make that clear. So you can say no to people carrying the holidays over, but to do that, you have to have evidence that you have taken steps to encourage your staff to take the holidays. And also it mustn't be that you've stopped them taking the leave. So if you've stopped them taking the leave because you need all hands to the pump, then they should be allowed to carry it over. Thanks, Amber.
So we're now going to discuss the ongoing furlough implications.
So the furlough implications. So we can, as employers, enforce holidays, and if you have an employee on furlough, they can be expected to take holiday. When they're on furlough, if they're on 80% of their salary or the cap 2,500 amount, if they're lucky to be on a higher salary than 80% of that, then they should be paid 100% of their pay when they're actually on holiday. It's just important to note, people think they can just put through holidays and the employees continue to enjoy the 80% furlough pay. That's not the case. If they're on annual leave, they should be getting 100% of the pay for that time. If you require your staff to take holidays, you need to give them notice. So if you want them to take 1 week's holiday, you have to give them 2 weeks notice. I would actively encourage you to do that in writing rather than just verbal. We are now seeing a lot of challenges from the previous holiday year, where employers have told their staff to take holidays verbally and may or may not have paid them 100%. I think I've had cases of both, where the employee is challenging it to say, well, I didn't want to take my holiday. And in the absence of having something in writing, it makes it very difficult for the client to argue. So if you are going to enforce a holiday, I would advise you put that in writing as well as have that verbal conversation. So to make it clear, you have to give double the duration of notice as the duration of holiday. So if you want somebody to take 2 days holiday, they would get 4 days notice. 1 week's holiday, 2 weeks notice. It's also important to consider returning from furlough. So hopefully this is all going to come to an end and we're going to go back to normal life, but it's not going to be in the short term. I think everyone's waiting with bated breath to see what the Prime Minister says on Monday. But as it stands at the moment, the coronavirus job retention scheme is a plan to end at the end of August. So it may not be extended again, or it may only be extended for certain people. So I think there's talk of only extending it for hospitality workers. But we won't know until, I suppose, Monday will give us an idea, and I'm sure there'll be more changes beyond Monday as and when things happen and change. So thinking about this, some employers may not be in a position to return employees to work because we're not sure when everything's going to be open. So I would still encourage people to take annual leave now, because even though for most people we're at the start of the holiday year, for some we're at the end, it depends when your holiday year starts, it would help to stop creating a backlog for the next holiday year, i.e. if your holiday year starts January to December and following Monday's announcement, we maybe look at returning your employees to work in June time, July time. Well, by that point, they've already accrued half a year's holiday, and then they're coming back to work. Hopefully the world will be busy and people will be spending all that money they've been saving up during lockdown, and you might need your staff and you might not be allowed, or it might not be appropriate to let them have annual leave at that point. So I would consider this holiday year as well as the previous holiday year to make sure that they don't return after a period of time with a huge backlog. So moving on, Amber.
So we'll now look at managing team leave balances.
Okay, so not getting many holiday requests. So personally, I do this for my team. I look at my team and carrying out an audit, and I would say I generally do this mid-year in the normal world, but you may want to do it now given the world we're in. Carry out an audit and see how much annual leave people have got, whether they've carried any over, how much they've carried over, and plan for the future. See how many people have this huge backlog of annual leave, or even not a huge backlog, but may have a backlog by the time you get to the point where they return to work. I would at that point encourage staff, especially those with excess holidays, to book the annual leave at this point. I would also, as part of this process, explain to the employees how important it is that they actually take that annual leave. Some of us will be like, well, I can't go on holiday, so why would I bother taking my leave? But it's really important for physical and mental health to take that rest away from work to avoid burnout. And people still need time to themselves not working. I know those of us that are working from home, it doesn't always feel like work because we're in the house all day, but it is still work and you still are at risk of burnout. So I would encourage them to take it and discuss the benefits of taking the time off. I would also have a deadline for any holiday. So say you have your annual leave runs January to December and you've allowed a carryover because of whatever reason for last year. I would have a reasonable deadline for them to take it by a certain time. Now, in some businesses, it could be 3 months, and then actively encourage the staff to take that holiday within that 3 months. Depending on how busy you are, you might want to extend that. That is normally deemed an appropriate amount of time for somebody to take accrued holidays that have been carried over from the previous holiday year, but it depends on the numbers and how many people you can afford to take time off. Okay, so these things to consider. So when considering enforcing holidays, managing holidays, it's important to think about how many people you can have off at one time, and then assume a specific amount of people that you need at work. So I generally, as my team, I would look at my team. There are so many of us. I probably would want maybe a fifth of them off at one time to help cover the phones. So you look at your own workforce, you see how many people you can accommodate at one time and try and stick to that where possible. There are other things to consider though in the current climate, and that is if somebody does come into contact with somebody with COVID, they may have to quarantine, or somebody coming back from a holiday, they may have to quarantine. You may also have to consider people who have this holiday carryover. So say you've got Bob who took all his holidays last year, but then you've got Fred who didn't take any. It might be that we prioritise Fred because he's got a higher holiday carryover, and make sure that he takes some before anyone else. So that is also a point to consider. The ability to work from home. So quarantine for some people will mean that they can't work. My husband drives a lorry for a living. If he has to quarantine, he can't do his job. Whereas I'm fortunate enough that I'm currently working from home. If I had to quarantine, it wouldn't impact my work. So you look at your workforce and try and understand how that would impact you as a business. And then you should also consider the likelihood of higher sickness levels due to COVID. I think I've been fortunate enough that none of my team have had to take any time off due to COVID. So I think I'm in a blessed situation, but not everyone is in the same boat. And it's important to understand the impact that would have on your business. You should also remember that you don't have to honour a request to cancel annual leave once it's approved. It's all about being reasonable. So if you have an employee that's booked 3 weeks for a once in a lifetime trip to the Maldives for an important birthday or wedding anniversary, and they then come to you and say, well, my holiday's been cancelled, I can no longer go to Maldives because of the lockdown, can I cancel my leave? I would advise that you look at it and maybe allow them to cancel an appropriate amount of it. But if somebody comes to you and says, well, I can't go to Malaga for a week that I had planned, I go every year, I always go at this time of year, and that gets cancelled, then you're well within your rights to say, no, we do require you to take that leave, or at least some of the leave. My advice is in them kind of situations, be reasonable, consider the situation, and like I say, if somebody's booked a long time off for a holiday that's not going ahead, it may be unreasonable and it might not help with the employee-employer relationship to say no to them. So I generally take it on a case-by-case basis. You may also want to, as discussed, allocate holidays to staff if you've got a big gap in holidays. So you've got a time when no one's off and you've got people like Bob with them excess holidays. You might want to just instruct Bob that he must take his holidays in this time, because that helps you manage your staffing levels and your annual leave balances, so it's the best of both worlds. And then you also can enforce holiday during notice periods. Now, the government changed the rules on furlough and notice, so employers now have to pay notice even if the employee is on furlough. So just to be clear on that, if your employee is currently on furlough and they resign, or they're made redundant or dismissed for some reason, you can no longer claim that furlough back, that 8%, that maximum 2,500 a month back from the government for what would be their notice period. So it may be wise to instruct people to take holidays during their notice period, because you can't claim it back anyway, and it avoids you the risk of you having to double pay. So pay the furlough, which you can't claim back, and then have to pay holidays on top.
So I've got a couple of questions from the audience now, Linda, which relate to carrying over leave and enforcing annual leave. So I want to ask you the first one now, if that's okay.
Perfect.
If an employee carries over holiday, what happens if they leave that year? Are they paid all their carryover or just a prorated amount?
So if you have allowed the carryover and they leave the business, then they would be entitled to be paid any accrued holiday in the current holiday year and any carried over holiday that you have allowed. It's all about allowing it. If you've allowed the carryover, as we talked in one of the earlier slides, if you're not actively encouraging them to take the leave and they have carried over and you've allowed that and they then resign, technically they're entitled to be paid them holidays.
Okay, hopefully that's cleared that up and it all makes sense. And we have another question now, which is it fair to give notice to employees to take holiday during a lockdown when the fundamental purpose of a holiday is resting, relaxing, and enjoying leisure time? The restrictions in lockdown do not necessarily allow for this.
So I suppose going back to the provision of holiday, holiday is not a holiday from your life, a holiday from your house. Holiday is for time off work to recuperate. So just because we are currently in lockdown and I can't go bowling with my children, or to the cinema or to a restaurant, doesn't mean that I can't take time off for rest and relaxation away from my job. That's the important part to know in all this, that holiday isn't a provision set up by the government to go to Portugal for a week. It is time away from work. So for rest and relaxation. Now, what you choose to do as your relaxation is really your business and not really anything to do with the workplace or employment law. As long as you're giving the time away from work. I suppose if people are taking holidays now, I think probably lots of dogs are getting walked and we're having lots of countryside walks, because probably that's one of the only things, that and the supermarket and B&M, I suppose. But yeah, it's time away from work. It's important to understand that, rather than time to do something pleasurable with your family, which I think a lot of people struggle to get their head round, because it does just feel like a bit of a waste, but you do still need that time away from work.
Personally, I've never enjoyed going to the large Tesco superstore in my area than I have during lockdown. Like, I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, and that and B&M, it's the one place open. Let's all go to B&M, queue up outside in the rain and go into
I can
B&M.
find some really exciting things in there. We've got a couple of other questions which relate to this section, so I want to ask those now, just so it flows well for everyone. Someone's asked how they can manage accrued holidays during maternity leave, as they don't currently have a written policy on this.
So holidays during maternity leave you don't need a policy on holiday during maternity leave, because the law is quite clear. And what it says is that if an employee is on maternity leave, they have to be able to carry their holidays over to be used when they're back at work. Now, as somebody that specialised in my previous role in how to treat maternity people, I had quite a good tactic to deal with this. So I would look, before a lady goes off on her maternity leave, I would look at the amount of holidays she will accrue in her expected maternity leave time. Now, I have had ladies that have said, I'm only going to take 4 weeks and I'm going to come back to work, and then the reality of a baby hits them and then they want to take the full 52 weeks, which is not surprising. But it's good to get an idea of how long people are going to want to take at the beginning, and then you can calculate how many holidays they're going to accrue. And then what I always encourage is them to take an appropriate number before they go off, even if it means maybe taking some out of the next holiday year, depending if they're going to take the full 52 weeks. And then I would generally encourage them to tag someone at the end. It may be that they would want to have some holidays taken, bring their maternity leave to an end during the last 13 weeks that are unpaid. That's statutory maternity, not company maternity. If you've got a company policy, things may be just a bit different. But if somebody's on statutory maternity leave and statutory maternity pay, once that pay comes to an end, people may want to take their accrued holidays at that point. So my advice to you is have a plan, sit down with your employee, go through what they want, go through expectations. If somebody, like my previous example, says, well, I'm only going to have a month off, be open and honest with them and say, you may change your mind, there is flexibility, and talk about what you're going to do with holidays. If a baby comes early and they've booked holidays before, and they are in the previous holiday year and it was all agreed, your plan goes a bit awry, then have a conversation while they're off. There's nothing to stop you speaking to your staff when they're on maternity leave, as long as it's not too much, as long as it's an acceptable amount for both of you, and get them to agree maybe to tag it on at the end of the 52 weeks to lengthen their time off with the baby. But I would always get a plan in place and have open and honest conversations with your staff that are going off on maternity leave, to plan for holidays and usage. But yeah, they should be allowed to carry them over. If none of this happens for one reason or another, they just go off on maternity leave and they've accrued a whole load of holidays, they will need to be taken following the maternity leave.
Fantastic. Thank you, Linda. I think we'll move on now and we'll save the rest of the questions for the designated Q&A time because they are flooding in, but I want to make sure we cover all of today's content. So we're going to look at employees traveling abroad now.
Okay, so at the moment, no one can travel. Well, you can't travel for a holiday. You can travel if you've got a legally permitted reason to do so. Maybe you've got a poorly family member, or for work. But aside from that, no one should be traveling at the moment. Now, as I said previously, the statutory right for a paid rest break is from work, not a holiday abroad. So people at the moment shouldn't be going abroad. So this shouldn't happen. But things are going to open up soon, hopefully. So what to do about it? How do we plan for it? Can we stop an employee going abroad? Well, the answer to that is no. But given you have a duty of care towards your employees, if there is a risk, a high risk that the country they're going to is one of these countries that are on the red list, and there's going to be repercussions of them going, then I would make them aware of them repercussions. It may be that some people just don't watch the news, which is odd, but not everyone wants to see the news and they don't understand the repercussions. So make them aware of the potential repercussions, which may discourage them from going. So if they have to quarantine for 2 weeks and they are not a home worker, it might put them off. It's not 2 weeks now, is it? It's 10 days. But if they have to quarantine on the return, it may put them off taking that time, and just make it clear at that point that any time off for quarantining after a holiday isn't paid. It's not, it's not an extension holiday. It would be unpaid, and we would actively discourage you from going to this place because of the risks.
Ready to move on, Linda?
Yep, thanks, Amber.
Perfect.
So, questions to ask. So, does the employee need to inform you that they're going on holiday? No. They don't have to say, oh, I'm going to go to Portugal, Spain. They just have a right to take that time off. It's up to them where they go. Can they be told not to go abroad? Well, not really. It may be unreasonable to say where and when they can go. They may have family there. They may be going there for more than a reason to just have rest and relaxation. It may be that they've not seen their relative for a long time, and that's why they're going. So it would be unreasonable to tell them not to go abroad or where to go. Can we dismiss somebody if they can't work because of having to quarantine and self-isolate after a holiday? Now, the basic answer to this is it would potentially be unreasonable. However, it depends on what went before. So if you discuss this with your staff and explain that you need them back in work, and if they hadn't already booked it at the time of the discussion, they then went to book a holiday and went to somewhere where they would know at that point that they would have to isolate for 10 days when they came back, and then that left you short staffed. Maybe you have a care home or a business where they are absolutely required to work. Could we dismiss somebody at that point? Potentially. It's a case by case basis. So if somebody had a pre-booked holiday and then things changed and then they have to self-isolate maybe while they're away. I know people who have been on holiday and announcements have been made while they're away and they've not been able to come back in time to avoid the lockdown or the quarantine. Then to dismiss them would be unreasonable. So it's take it on a case by case basis, consider all options, and it's all about conversation and encouragement and knowing your staff. Speak to your staff. Oh, you booked 2 weeks, you're going somewhere nice. See what's going on and then make an informed decision at the point it happens, rather than not knowing your staff, not knowing where they're going, and then not having staff to cover because of quarantine.
Just be nosy.
Yes. Yes, thank you, Amber. Okay, so we're going to consider some action points now. Okay, so as we've discussed earlier, take an audit of your workforce holidays, understand who's got what and when, and who's taking what and when, and try and plan as much as you can now for the future. Get a policy in place. Now, most people have a normal holiday policy. It may be worth adding in some details about holidays abroad and quarantine, and set your rules out now before people have managed to book anything. I know the government are currently advising don't book holidays abroad. So get your policy in place and get it circulated before the masses start booking the holidays, and then you're in a bit of a tricky situation. Have a form, get that declaration in place, and then we can request evidence to ensure people are following the right rules. From the form should say something like, this is where I'm going, is there expected to be a quarantine, yes or no, and I've done everything I'm required to do by law. Get that form in place so that when staff come back to work after a holiday, you can quite clearly evidence the fact that they have done everything they need to do legally, therefore not putting your business at risk by bringing the virus into work. Review the maximum number of employees you can allow off at any time. Be mindful of approving holidays that overlap. Sometimes, I know I do it with my team. If it's somebody's taking a week and another person wants a week, and then there's an overlap of just one day, I would allow that, but maybe get plans in place for a buffer, so that maybe draw somebody in from another team to say, well, actually, if it's busy on this day, will you just pop on and support us, and have them plans there so that you've always got that contingency to make sure that you can staff your service or business. Remember your health and safety obligations. So if you know somebody that's been to a country where the risk of coronavirus is higher than us, which is probably difficult to think about at the moment. I think we're not doing too great ourselves at the moment. But if somebody's been somewhere that's high risk, or even if somebody's behaving in a high risk way and you know that they are, just be mindful of that, because you have an obligation under health and safety legislation and the Employment Rights Act to ensure a safe working environment for your staff. And if you know a particular employee that's coming into your business is not following them rules, it's important that you take appropriate steps to avoid that being a risk to your other staff. So if you are already a client, or if you have a HR service, take advice if you think somebody's behaving in a way that isn't what we would want under the current conditions. Encourage employees to keep you in the picture at all times. Just like Amber said, be nosy. Why not? You're the employer. You don't have to do it in a negative way. You can do it in a positive way. You can do it in a friendly, chit-chatty, but I just want to know from an employer's perspective where you're going and what you're doing. So encourage them to speak to you, have that open communication. Also, this is in most people's policies already. Lots of people don't consider it, and it can have actually, to be fair, a lot of holiday companies are being quite fair with people now, but if you've not got the holiday off work agreed and you've booked a holiday and then you can't go, that can have a huge implication on an individual through cost, because you're not necessarily going to get your money back. So remind your staff to get approval for the time off before they actually physically book their holidays, because other than that, it could be an expensive time for them. Or if they choose to go against advice, so you've said no to the holiday and they go anyway because they've already paid for it, then that's going to have repercussions through probably your disciplinary procedure. So it's really important that employees understand that they should get approval for holidays before the holiday is paid for. Keep fully informed of potential travel disruptions. Don't be one of these people that have their head in the sand over where we can and can't go at the moment. I think there are 33 countries on the red list at the moment, and if you come back from one of them countries, you're going to have to go in one of these lovely hotels. So keep an eye on that. Ensure that you know where the staff are going if you can, and where they shouldn't be going in the latest lockdown with the latest guidance, so that you can know yourself what kind of implication it's going to have for you. And finally, just be honest and transparent with your employees. Explain what you're doing and why. Hopefully you'll get buy-in, and it will help maintain the relationship, rather than just instruct and inform. Be open, honest, two-way conversation.
Amazing. So we've now got time for questions, which is great because we have loads of questions, Linda. So I'm just going to start at the top and go through, and if I think we've answered already, I will just let that person know. So the first question: HR has requested to furlough an employee for 1 week only and take this as annual leave. Remaining 3 weeks, EE worked normally. Can we do this?
Technically, yes. If you have a reduction in work and you are going to furlough your employee, then that's fine, as long as you get agreement, because furlough, I don't know whether you do know this, but furlough is an agreed state. It's a contract variation, and it's an agreed contract variation. And holiday is allowed during furlough. It is a tricky one because technically, so I'll give you an example. If you have annual shutdown for Christmas every year, and you deliberately put your staff on furlough for that period and just top them up, it does look like you're deliberately using the furlough system to financially benefit, and I'm sure that the Inland Revenue may see that as a breach of the fundamental intention of the coronavirus job retention scheme, because the staff would have been on annual leave anyway, and if you've only furloughed them for them 2 weeks that you would have the annual shutdown, then it would look like you're just circumventing the legislation for your own financial benefit. So if you're doing that, then expect to be, if somebody raises it with the Inland Revenue, expect to be scrutinised, and it may result in challenge. But technically, is it the possibility there? Yes. Would I advocate it? No.
Thank you, Linda. And just a lovely comment here, not a question, is that someone's really enjoying hearing a proper Mancunian accent.
Thank
So
you
that's
very
nice.
much.
I'd like to say, Barry Matthews, what about my accent? Even though I'm not even sure what it is. Hope you're enjoying it. So another question now is, can an employer make an offer to buy back holiday from the employee?
So the answer is potentially. Employees must be allowed to take the minimum of the 4 weeks holiday. If you have holiday above and beyond that, contractual holiday maybe, then rather than statutory holiday, that can be sold back to the business, and you can receive a payment for it. Other than that, statutory holidays and a minimum of the 20 days cannot be sold. They must be taken. The law didn't even allow for them 20 days to be carried over in normal circumstances prior to COVID. The only time they would have been allowed to be carried over is if you're on long-term sick or maternity or adoption leave or shared parental leave. If you were physically in work, you had to take them in the current holiday year, and they were the 20 days, not any in excess of that. I would always encourage staff to take the statutory minimum, which is 5.6 working weeks. However, if you have holidays in excess of that, I don't see anything wrong with buying them back if the employee is willing to sell them.
Thank you, Linda. We now have a question on Flexifurlough. Someone's asked, if employees are on Flexifurlough and being paid full salary for both days worked and the days when they are furloughed, is their holiday entitlement worked out based on the number of working days or the full week?
So holidays shouldn't change. So this isn't a straightforward question because it also depends on whether you work regular hours. But if you're contracted to work 40 hours a week and you're on Flexifurlough, so you're only working 2 hours a day, your holidays should be based on your 40 hours per week, not the hours that you're physically working during furlough. Hopefully that answers that.
Thank you, Linda. Another one here now is, if you have an employee on long-term sick, will they lose their annual leave? Does it all have to be paid upon termination?
Okay, two separate questions here. So if you have an employee currently on long-term sick, their holidays should carry over, and they can carry over there's conflicting in case law on this, but if we consider the legislation on it, they should carry over any holidays accrued in the previous 2 years. There is slightly different legislation on it, and the oldest case, the Stringer case, does say 6 years, but we've had more recent legislation that does change that slightly. But if somebody's been on annual leave maybe for the last 12 months and they've not taken any annual leave, and you're now dismissing them under medical capability and it's in the next holiday year, they should be paid the annual leave that they have accrued and not taken. If they are not being dismissed and they are still expected to be off for a little while yet, but eventually return, then that holiday can be carried over into the next holiday year and taken when they return to work.
Okay, hopefully that's answered that question. Now, regarding quarantining sounds strange when I say it then. Can you ask employees to take holidays for quarantine if they have taken a holiday abroad?
Well, this is all about a policy. This gets back to the conversation about the policy. If you know that they're going somewhere where they will have to quarantine on return, maybe they did book it before the quarantine rules came in, but they've not yet gone. I would encourage them, if possible, to take holiday for some of the quarantine period, and maybe agree an appropriate amount of unpaid leave as well. So I suppose an example would be, I booked a holiday to Lanzarote in July. I'm hoping it's going to go ahead. And if it does, I'm hoping that I won't have to quarantine. But given I've already booked that holiday, I booked it last year, and we don't know what was going to happen at that point. At the point I booked my holiday, I don't think we had to quarantine coming back from Spain. So, but then the rules change all the time. So if the rule now changes before I go on my holiday, I would expect to have a sit down. If I physically went to work, I would expect to have a sit down with my manager to say, I've just been told now on return from holiday, I've got to quarantine for 10 days. What can we do about these 10 days? And come up with an agreement. Maybe I've got lots of holidays and I can take another week's holiday for some of it, and then maybe take unpaid leave for the rest. Maybe I've got no holidays left and we agree a period of unpaid leave, or maybe we look at to see if I can actually cancel it and get a refund. So it's all about open channels of communication, and if we can and we have got annual leave, by all means book it, agree it with your employee. But if we haven't, look at other options.
And now to clarify paying for holidays while someone's on furlough. Someone's asked, if you pay holiday pay while an employee is on furlough, does the employer pay just a top up of 20% over the furlough pay at 80%, or do they pay the whole 100% for that time? And does that therefore reduce the amount you can claim for furlough pay? Or is the holiday pay in addition to this?
Okay, so if somebody goes on holiday, so takes holiday while they're on furlough, if they are currently being paid exactly 80% of their normal salary, so say the threshold meets their 80% of their salary, the 2,500. If they take holiday during that time, you can still claim that furlough back from the government, and you then top up to 100% of their pay, and it's just the 20% you pay that you can't claim back. So you can still claim the 80% back, but you can't claim the 20% back. It's important to note that people whose salary are higher than that threshold, so say 80% of your employee's salary is over the 2,500, then you would not pay 20%, you would pay them their normal rate. So it would be the difference between the 2,500 and what they would normally enjoy as a salary when they're normally in work. So, but you could still claim the 2,500 maximum back. So you can claim furlough pay for time that an employee is on holiday.
Brilliant, thank you, Linda. And when it comes to accruing holiday, can an employee accrue holiday while they're working overtime, or is it just based on their contracted hours?
So holiday accrual is, again, the law on this has changed a number of times, but I think that the current test case is quite strong, and what that says is that if an employee works regular overtime, then that overtime should be taken into account when paying holidays. So it's a bit complex, but basically, say you've got staff that are salaried, but they regularly do so many hours overtime each week, and when they're on holiday, they would only enjoy the normal salaried payment as their pay. What you could do is you could calculate a difference, so how much it would have been had you taken the overtime into account, and just pay them a top-up amount. That's what a lot of people do. If they are on irregular hours, then we would just look back at the 52 weeks and see what they would normally earn and apply that in relation to the holiday pay. But yes, regular overtime should be taken into account when calculating holiday payments. If it's sporadic, then don't include it. If it's regular, if they always do overtime, so much overtime every month, then that should be taken into account.
So I've got a question which is of a similar theme now, and they've asked, if staff were put on shorter hours before flexible furlough was introduced, how much holiday do they occur during that time?
So if employees are put on shorter hours, it would depend on what that is. If it's a temporary change due to short-time working and the contract hasn't changed, they would still get their holiday based on their contractual entitlement. If the shorter hours is part of an irregular contract, so they work irregular hours, the good work plan says that we should look back at the previous 52 weeks to see how much they would normally work to calculate their holiday entitlement. So it would actually depend on the contract of employment to which calculation used.
Thank you, Linda.
No worries.
Now, someone's asked, and I'm not sure if you're going to be able to answer this one, where are businesses that are closed supposed to get the money for accrued holidays?
So business, okay, yeah, unfortunately, I think that's a question for Mr. Boris Johnson rather than me. It's tricky, is all I can say, and I really do feel for anyone working in the hospitality sector, anyone running a pub, a club, anything that's been shut for the majority of this. It is really tricky times, and I know there's been, from what I've personally experienced through my job, I've seen lots and lots of redundancies and businesses really struggling, and I really feel for you, but unfortunately the law is the law and we are expected to comply with the law in relation to holiday. So I wish I could say something nicer than that, but I really can't, and I really do feel for anyone in a position that can't afford to pay their holiday bill.
And similarly, someone's asked, how long will the government furlough pay be at 80%? And I think that's another one we can't answer yet. I mean, if they bring in the job retention scheme, that will obviously decrease, won't it? But we're yet to see what's going to happen.
One thing I would say, sorry, going back to the previous question, sorry, is if you can't afford to pay your staff's accrued holidays at this point and they are physically not in work and they're on furlough and you are taking advantage of the furlough scheme, there is nothing to stop you deferring them holidays and to next year, because the law, this is part of the changes in the legislation on holidays, is to support businesses that can't give holidays due to the pandemic, and not being able to financially afford to give them holidays is a very good reason to delay them and allow them in maybe 2022, when, fingers crossed, touch wood, whatever superstition you have, the world is in a much better place. That is allowed. That is something that it's set up for, that to help employers who can't afford holidays at this point. So it may be worth, even if you do open back up and you can't afford holidays, it may be worth still deferring them holidays, maybe until the next holiday year, which is legally appropriate in that circumstance, because you physically can't afford it. So it's just something to bear in mind. In relation to the job retention scheme, I think Monday will be very telling. I think Boris will be making some form of announcement whether he's going to extend the job retention scheme, or maybe change it slightly or reduce it, so if you're in a business that's fortunate enough to be allowed to be open, then maybe you will no longer be able to utilize the scheme, whereas businesses that, because of the lockdowns, are still not allowed to be open, he may extend it. I really don't know what the intentions are, but I'm sure we'll hear more on Monday.
And just going back to recurring holiday while working overtime, a couple of people have asked, what would you class as regularly working overtime? Would that be a certain amount every month? How would you go about deciding what that would be?
So we would look at it on a case-by-case basis, but how I would say, if you if you get paid monthly and you have 10 hours overtime every single month, then that would be regular. Or maybe you, okay, then maybe you paid monthly and you have 8 one month, 12 the next month, 16 the month after. I would then average it out, but you're always working overtime. Whereas if you get paid monthly and maybe over December you do have quite a bit of overtime, but then the rest of the year you have none, then that wouldn't be regular, that would be sporadic. So it's all about what's physically happening in practice and see if there's a pattern. If somebody just does overtime in 1 month or even 2 months of the year, I wouldn't consider that regular, but it's a case by case basis. If you're not sure, take advice.
Thank you, Linda. Someone's now asked if setting a rule of taking a percentage of annual leave per quarter, is that in any way unfair?
No, it's not unfair. I believe it to be reasonable. I would always encourage my team to take an appropriate number of holidays within each part of the year. Generally, people do spread the holidays over the 12 months so that they don't end up at the end of a holiday year with an excessive amount of holidays. What we tend to see from an advice perspective is certain people generally don't take holiday, and then you get to the last month of the holiday, whether that's December or March, with a massive glut of holidays, and that's no good for anyone. So I think it is appropriate to encourage staff to take an appropriate number of holidays at each quarter of the year. Some companies I advise are a bit more prescriptive, so they actually do say you need to take a week by the end of March. You need to take 2 weeks in between March and September, and then you need to take a week at the end of the year, and then you've got your sporadic holidays, a few days to play with in between. And as long as it's consulted in and agreed, there is absolutely nothing wrong with that at all.
Okay, thank you, Linda. We've got another question here now, which is a little bit long, so I'm going to summarise it. There's a payroll professional who works at a company, and everyone has been working from home. And in spring last year, they were told they needed to use 60% of their holiday by the end of August 2020 and the remainder by December 2020. However, this year they found out that some teams have been able to carry over leave, although those in the payroll team weren't allowed, and it was declined even though they've had so much pressure. Now, could this be seen as inequality in the workplace?
It depends on the reason. I would probably want to understand the reason for the different treatment. As an advisor, I would advise my clients to act consistently. So if one individual, if a group of individuals are allowed to do one thing, then everyone should be able to do it, unless you've got a good business reason for it. So, but bear in mind as well is if you've been that busy and you've been working in payroll, and payroll has been probably the trickiest, well, one of the trickiest businesses to be in at the moment, given the furlough scheme, the job support scheme that we all planned for that didn't go ahead, and the changes to furlough. I think payroll systems have been constantly evolving, and people have been constantly, trying to keep on top of the legislation. It may have been that they wanted to encourage you to take that leave, to have that rest and relaxation, to have that shut off, because it's been a tricky time. I from my payroll colleagues, I know this. It's been a tricky time, and maybe they just didn't want you to burn out. So my advice from an individual perspective rather than a business perspective is speak to your manager and try and understand why they've done that before thinking, well, I've been treated differently. You haven't been treated differently anyway. Everyone's got the holidays. It's just when to take them, and was it appropriate to advise you to take them and not other people? Potentially. It's always good to talk and understand the business perspective before thinking I've been unfairly treated.
Thank you, Linda. I'm going to try and get through a couple more questions before we wrap up, and then otherwise we can send these on and make sure we get responses out. And I've got one about notice period here, which is regarding the notice period and enforcing holiday, do the same rules apply for giving double the notice? A lot of employees have 1 month's notice period, which is challenging with 4 to 6 weeks left to take.
So as a rule, the answer is yes, unless your policy allows for it. So some company handbooks, some policies do allow for any remaining accrued holiday to be taken during your notice period. So check your policy and see what that says, and ensure that if it's in your policy and you're going to look to start using it now, ensure that it's been used before and it's something that you would do. But if it's not in your policy and you do have somebody with a 1 month notice period and they've got more holiday than that, then it's tricky. What I would do in that circumstance is speak to the employee and try and agree that they take their holidays rather than instruct them. Agreement is generally the best solution for everyone. So try and get them to agree to take their holidays. If unfortunately circumstances are that they won't agree, then I would instruct them to take an appropriate number. So if they've got a 1 month notice period, it's gonna be tricky to get all them holidays, and then the rest will have to be paid on termination, unfortunately.
Thank you, Linda. Right, I'm going to ask one more question now, and then I'll make sure that Linda and I discuss the questions remaining and hopefully get these answers out to you. I think we've managed to get through loads though, so that's been fantastic. So the final question is, if an employee has to quarantine, what must the employer pay? Statutory sick pay, assuming the employee can't work from home.
So it would depend on why they're quarantining, if that's a word. So if they have to quarantine because they've had an alert from the track and trace app, or they've been contacted to say that they need to quarantine because they've been in contact with somebody, then they would be entitled to be paid SSP. If they have to quarantine because they've been on holiday, then there is no SSP due. It would be either something that you would be willing to pay them from a business perspective, or unpaid because they've chosen to go on holiday. Therefore, that quarantine was down to their own personal choice. Therefore, SSP is not applicable.
Thank you, Linda. So I just wanted to let everyone know that MorePay has a knowledge centre, and they have loads of pieces of content on here which will help you with the managing leave information. And we're also going to send on this recording and all of the slides to you later today or tomorrow. So don't worry, you'll get a copy of everything. And for those of you who aren't familiar with MorePay, they provide payroll and HR software and managed services, and they've been around for more than 50 years and have 10,000 customers across all of the UK. They promise to make payroll and HR easy with simple onboarding, easy to use software with rich functionality and flexible services. So that's it from us. I'd like to say thank you all for joining us today. And Linda, thank you for co-hosting. You've been amazing. I hope you enjoyed it.
Oh, I love holidays. It's probably one of my favourite subjects, so love it. No, it's been great. Thank you.
And I certainly love going on holiday, so I hope we can do that soon. And in the meantime, I hope everyone stays safe and well. We'll speak to you soon.